3 times a day. What the rancher did next changed history, Wild West stories. John McAllister swung his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles from yesterday's work. Life on the ranch was not easy, but it was the only life he had ever known. His small cabin, made of rough-hewn logs, smelled faintly of smoke from the stove and the faint scent of hay that always seemed to cling to the walls. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the distant cries of cattle and the occasional call of a hawk circling above. John's day always started early, before the world was fully awake. He dressed quickly in his worn boots, denim trousers, and a faded shirt, the fabric soft from years of hard labor. He grabbed his hat and stepped outside, feeling the cold bite at his face. The morning air was crisp, and dew clung to the tall grasses. As he walked toward the barn, he paused for a moment, taking in the quiet of the plains. It was a calm he had come to love, a quiet that made him feel connected to the land. The ranch had been in John's family for years. His father had built the first fences, and his grandfather had taught him how to ride, rope, and care for the cattle. John remembered riding alongside his father as a boy, learning which trails led to water and which grasses were best for feeding the herds. Those lessons had stayed with him, forming the backbone of everything he did. Now, as the man in charge, he carried that responsibility every single day. The land was harsh and unforgiving, but it was his, and he loved it fiercely. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and animals greeted him. Cows mooed softly, and horses stamped their hooves impatiently. John began his morning routine, moving from one stall to the next. He checked each animal carefully, looking for signs of illness or injury. A scrape here, a limp there, he noticed everything. His hands were skilled and steady, a result of years of work, and he knew each animal almost as well as he knew the land. Some ranchers might have relied on hired hands, but John trusted no one more than himself when it came to the care of his livestock. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed higher, and the plains were alive with activity. John led some of the cattle to the nearest grazing area, watching them move in a slow, steady line across the fields. The sound of hooves against the dry earth was comforting, rhythmic. He often wondered about the generations of ranchers who had worked these same lands, facing the same challenges, hoping their herds would thrive. There was a sense of continuity in it, a connection to something larger than himself. Even though the work was routine, John never let it become boring. He had a habit of observing everything around him, looking for subtle changes in the land and the animals. He noticed small signs that others might miss, a patch of grass that grew taller, a stream that ran a little clearer, a cow that acted strangely. These observations, though small, were important. John had learned that life on the frontier required careful attention to details. One small mistake could mean lost cattle, wasted feed, or even danger to his family. The ranch was more than just a job, it was a way of life. John took pride in every fence post he hammered into the ground, every mile he rode to check the herd, and every hour he spent repairing equipment. His hands bore the marks of years of labor, calloused and strong, but they were also hands that could coax a frightened calf or calm a nervous horse. There was a satisfaction in knowing that he had built something lasting, something that would endure even if he was gone. As the morning passed, John began to prepare for the tasks that would take him through the heat of the day. He filled water troughs, checked the feed, and mended broken fences. The ranch was a living, breathing thing, and it required constant attention. Even the weather could become a challenge. A sudden storm could wash out fences or turn the trails to mud, and a long stretch of dry weather could leave the cattle hungry and restless. John respected the land, knowing that it could provide abundantly but also take away just as easily. Yet, despite the hard work and endless chores, there was a joy in the simplicity of the life he led. He loved the sound of the wind through the grass, the sight of the sun setting behind the hills, and the way the herd moved together, almost as if it understood his guidance. The ranch was demanding, yes, but it offered freedom in return, a freedom that few in the crowded towns could understand. John often thought about those towns, with their busy streets and loud saloons, and he felt grateful for the quiet strength of his own land. One thing that set John apart from other ranchers was his curiosity. He never accepted the world as it was. He noticed patterns, tried new methods, and experimented quietly. Sometimes it was as simple as adjusting the rotation of the grazing fields, and other times it was more involved, like observing the health of the herd near different water sources. His mind was always working, looking for ways to improve life on the ranch and ensure the cattle remained healthy and strong. By late morning, the sun was high and the heat began to press down on the plains. John paused for a moment under the shade of a lone oak tree, wiping the sweat from his brow. He watched the herd grazing peacefully, and he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Life on the ranch was unpredictable, full of hardships and long days, but it was also full of rewards. He had learned to be patient, resilient, and resourceful. Each day was a test, but he faced it with determination and quiet confidence. John's neighbors respected him not only for his skill, but also for his integrity. He was known to help others when needed, whether it was lending a hand during a difficult roundup or offering advice about the land. But he was also cautious, protective of what was his, understanding that in the Wild West, resources were scarce and disputes could arise quickly. Trust was earned slowly, and John had learned that lesson well. As the morning turned toward noon, John began the next phase of his routine. He checked the fences along the northern boundary, where the cattle tended to wander, and he made notes about areas that might need extra attention. He observed the small creek that cut across his land, watching the water flow over the rocks, glinting in the sunlight. There was something soothing about it, something steady and reliable in the rhythm of nature. John often thought about how important water was to the life of the ranch, not just for the cattle but for the land itself. By the time he returned to the barn for a midday break, John felt a sense of accomplishment. The herd was healthy, the fences were secure, and the land was in good order. But he also knew that this was just the beginning of the day. More work awaited: repairs, maintenance, and constant observation. On a ranch, the work never truly ended. Yet despite the challenges, John loved every moment. It was a hard life, yes, but it was honest, fulfilling, and deeply connected to the land he cherished. Even as he sat down to eat a simple meal of bread, cheese, and coffee, John's mind wandered over the ranch, planning the next steps. He considered which fields the cattle would graze that afternoon, how the weather might change, and whether any of the animals needed extra care. It was a lot to think about, but it was the kind of life he had chosen, and it was one he would not trade for anything. In the vast, open plains of the Wild West, John McAllister's days were long and demanding, but they were also full of small victories, moments of beauty, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived in harmony with the land. Little did he know, the observations and habits he was forming during these ordinary days would soon lead him down a path that would change not only his ranch, but the future of ranching itself. The story of his 3-times-a-day routine had only just begun, and the plains held secrets that even a man as experienced as John was only beginning to discover. The morning sun had climbed higher over the horizon, casting long shadows across the rolling plains. John McAllister rose early, as he always did, his routine as predictable as the dawn itself. For years, he had followed the same pattern, feeding the livestock, checking fences, observing the land, and noting even the smallest changes. It was this habit, repeated morning, noon, and night, that had kept the ranch running smoothly and the herd healthy. But John was a man who noticed things others often overlooked, and today, as he saddled his horse, he felt a stirring of curiosity that he could not ignore. The herd had been acting strangely for weeks. Some cows were restless, wandering farther than usual, while others seemed unusually energetic, almost playful. John had watched them closely, noting patterns that seemed random at first but slowly revealed themselves over days of careful observation. Something about the land, he suspected, was influencing their behavior. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but a man who spent his life on the plains learned to trust his instincts. The cattle were trying to tell him something, and John intended to find out what it was. As the morning progressed, John led his herd along the familiar trails he had walked countless times before. The dry earth crunched under the hooves of the cattle, and the horses' reins jingled softly as he guided them. He had ridden these paths so often that he knew every bend, every rise, and every hidden depression in the land. But today, he decided to venture a little farther, exploring a section of the ranch he had neglected in recent months. There was a feeling in the air that told him to look closer, to pay attention, and John always listened to such instincts. It was on this uncharted stretch that he stumbled upon something unusual, a small, hidden stream, half concealed by a grove of wild willows. The water sparkled brightly in the morning sun, clear and cool, cutting a ribbon of life through the otherwise dry plains. John had ridden past this area countless times, yet he had never noticed the stream before. It seemed almost as if the land had been waiting for him to find it. The moment he saw it, he felt a strange sense of possibility, a quiet excitement that grew stronger the longer he watched the water ripple over the rocks. Curious, John led a few of the cattle toward the stream. The moment the cows approached, he noticed a remarkable change. They moved with purpose, their restless energy settling into calm, strong strides. Their eyes seemed brighter, their coats shinier. He dismounted and watched them carefully, noting the difference. This was no ordinary water hole. Something about it had an effect on the animals, making them healthier and more vibrant. John's heart quickened. Could this hidden stream hold the key to improving the herd? He decided to experiment carefully, following his instinct but taking no unnecessary risks. Over the next several days, John began to lead the cattle to the stream at the same times each day, morning, noon, and evening. At first, the results were subtle, almost imperceptible. A cow that had been slow or weak began to walk with steadier steps. Another that had been restless and anxious seemed calmer. John kept detailed notes, writing down observations in a small leather-bound notebook he always carried. Each change, no matter how minor, was recorded. He had learned that on the frontier, careful observation was often the difference between success and failure. Word of John's thriving herd began to spread slowly through the nearby towns. Other ranchers noticed that his cattle were stronger, healthier, and more productive than most. Some were curious, while others were skeptical, dismissing it as mere luck, but John paid them little attention. He was not driven by pride or competition. He was driven by the land, by the desire to care for his herd, and by the quiet hope that he might have discovered something remarkable. Each day, as he led the animals to the stream, he felt a sense of purpose he had never felt before. John's routine became more deliberate, almost ritualistic. Morning, noon, and night, he ensured the herd had access to the stream. He noticed patterns in the way the animals drank, grazed, and rested afterward. Some cows lingered near the water longer than others, and he began to see connections between those cows and their increased health. Even the calves, once slow to grow, seemed to thrive near the sparkling water. John realized that this was more than just a fluke. It was a discovery that could have significant implications for ranching in the region. Despite the success, John remained cautious. He understood the fragility of life on the frontier. Drought, disease, or mismanagement could undo months of progress in a matter of days. He also knew that sharing too much too soon could attract unwanted attention from larger ranchers or opportunists. So he continued his routine quietly, observing carefully, making adjustments based on what he saw. His hands, calloused and steady, worked tirelessly, guiding the herd with patience and skill. His eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing, and his mind was constantly analyzing, connecting patterns that others might overlook. The stream also changed John's perception of the land. He began to see the ranch in a new light, appreciating the hidden resources it contained. There were places he had ignored, corners of the property that seemed insignificant, yet now they revealed themselves to him as vital pieces of a complex ecosystem. John felt a deep respect for the land, recognizing that it had secrets waiting to be discovered by those patient enough to look closely. It was a lesson in humility and awareness, one that would shape the way he managed the ranch for years to come. As days turned into weeks, John noticed that his success was not only in the health of the herd, but in the harmony of life on the ranch. The cattle moved with a new rhythm, the horses responded more readily, and even the fields seemed to flourish with the careful balance he maintained. He felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond simple accomplishment. This was a deeper understanding, a connection to the land and its creatures that few people ever experienced. He began to realize that small, consistent actions, like leading the herd to the stream 3 times a day, could create profound results over time. One afternoon, as John sat under a tree near the stream, watching the cattle graze, he thought about the future. The discovery was promising, but he knew that it was only the beginning. There were questions he did not yet have answers to. What exactly was in the water that benefited the cattle? Could the effects be replicated elsewhere? How would others react if they learned of the stream? These questions lingered in his mind, but he felt confident that, with careful observation and patience, he could find the answers. John's curiosity also inspired him to experiment with other aspects of ranch life. He adjusted grazing schedules, tested different rotations of the herd, and monitored the effects closely. Each day brought new insights, small breakthroughs that added up over time. The land seemed to respond to his care, rewarding his attention with healthier pastures and more energetic animals. John felt a sense of mastery, not over the land, but alongside it, a partnership built on observation, patience, and respect. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, John had completed his routine. The cattle were settled near the stream, drinking and resting, and the horses were secure in their pens. He wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling both tired and exhilarated. The day had been long, as it always was, but it had been filled with discoveries, insights, and quiet triumphs. John knew that his 3 times a day routine was more than just a habit. It was becoming a method, a way to understand and work with the land in a way that few others had considered. As night fell, the plains were bathed in a soft, silver light. John stood outside his cabin, looking toward the horizon. The wind whispered through the grasses, carrying with it the distant sounds of wildlife and the gentle murmur of the stream. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a quiet pride in the knowledge that he was doing something meaningful. The land, the herd, and the routine were all connected in ways he was only beginning to understand. Little did John know, his careful observations, daily routines, and simple curiosity would soon attract attention beyond his small ranch. What he had discovered in a hidden stream was not just a benefit for his cattle. It had the potential to change ranching practices across the region. And though the world of the Wild West was harsh and full of challenges, John McAllister was ready to face whatever came next. His 3 times a day routine, simple as it seemed, was about to set in motion a chain of events that would leave a mark on history. The days on the ranch passed with their usual rhythm, but now there was a subtle change in John McAllister's life. His 3 times a day routine had become more than a simple habit. It was a careful system that guided the health and growth of his herd. Morning, noon, and evening, John led the cattle to the hidden stream, noting their behavior, observing their strength, and recording every detail in his notebook. He had learned to trust the quiet lessons of the land, and in doing so, he had uncovered something extraordinary. One bright morning, John noticed that the herd seemed more vigorous than ever. The cows moved gracefully across the fields, their coats shining in the sunlight, calves skipping alongside their mothers with unusual energy. John watched them with a mixture of pride and curiosity. He knew that the stream was responsible for these changes, but he did not yet understand the full extent of its power. Every day, as he observed the herd, he began to see patterns in their health and growth, patterns that suggested the water contained something unique, something that could change ranching forever. Word of John's success had begun to spread beyond his ranch. Neighbors came to ask questions, though many were skeptical. Some dismissed it as coincidence, while others whispered that John had discovered a secret trick, but no one could deny the results. His cattle were healthier, stronger, and more productive than any herd in the surrounding area. Rumors traveled slowly across the frontier, and soon, even town merchants and traveling ranchers were talking about the remarkable rancher whose herd seemed almost magical. It was during this time that a government official arrived in the small town nearby. His name was Thomas Harper, a man with a keen interest in agriculture and livestock. Harper had been traveling across the West to observe ranching practices and look for ways to improve the productivity of American cattle. When he heard about John McAllister and his thriving herd, he decided to visit personally. He had seen many claims during his travels, but something about John's story seemed different. Harper wanted to see the results with his own eyes. John met Harper on the ranch, offering him a warm but cautious welcome. The official had the look of a man used to authority, but John was not intimidated. He led Harper along the familiar trails, showing him the grazing areas, the barns, and finally, the hidden stream. Harper's eyes widened when he saw the water, its clarity and sparkle unlike any other source he had encountered. The cattle drank eagerly, moving with a vitality that immediately caught Harper's attention. He asked John questions, and John answered honestly, explaining his routine and observations. He spoke with humility, careful not to exaggerate, but there was a quiet confidence in his words. Harper was intrigued. He watched the herd for hours, noting their strength, alertness, and calm behavior near the stream. He even took water samples, sending them to the nearest laboratory for testing. John continued his daily routine without interruption, leading the cattle to the stream 3 times a day and observing their responses. Harper stayed on the ranch for several days, documenting everything carefully. He was beginning to realize that this was no ordinary discovery. The water contained minerals that could improve cattle health and growth significantly. The news of Harper's visit brought a mix of excitement and worry to John. He was proud of what he had found, but he also understood that attention could be a double-edged sword. Larger ranchers might want to take control of the land or the stream. Investors could pressure him to sell or share the discovery for profit. John valued the land and the herd more than anything, and he knew he had to protect them. He resolved to continue his careful routine and only share what was necessary, ensuring that the ranch and its secret remained safe while he explored the possibilities responsibly. As Harper departed, he promised John that the government would look further into the benefits of the water. Reports would be made, and perhaps the discovery could help other ranchers, but only if it was managed properly. John nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. He returned to his routine, leading the herd to the stream morning, noon, and night, more carefully than ever. Each step he took was measured, deliberate, and thoughtful. This was more than a habit now. It was a mission, one that could impact the future of ranching across the West. Over the next several weeks, John continued his experiments. He observed how the cattle responded to different grazing schedules, how the minerals in the stream seemed to affect their energy and growth, and how the land itself thrived with careful management. The ranch became a place of quiet innovation, a laboratory of sorts, where observation, patience, and routine combined to produce remarkable results. John's reputation grew quietly but steadily, and he began to correspond with other ranchers who were curious about his methods. He offered advice sparingly, always emphasizing the importance of observation and care. Despite the growing interest, challenges began to emerge. Some neighboring ranchers grew envious, questioning whether John's success was fair. They suspected he had some secret method or special treatment for his cattle and began to watch his movements more closely. John noticed their curiosity but remained calm. He knew that jealousy and suspicion were natural in a world where resources were limited and survival was never guaranteed. He resolved to focus on what he could control: the land, the herd, and his careful observations. One afternoon, as he walked along the northern boundary of the ranch, John reflected on how far he had come. The hidden stream, once unnoticed, had become the heart of his operations. It was the source of vitality for his herd and the key to the ranch's success. But more than that, it had transformed the way he thought about ranching. Observation, patience, and attention to detail had always been important, but now John saw them as essential tools for discovery and innovation. He realized that even in a harsh and unforgiving land, careful attention to small things could lead to extraordinary outcomes. The government tests on the stream water confirmed John's suspicions. The water contained minerals that enhanced cattle health and growth, a finding that was remarkable for ranchers everywhere. Harper's reports highlighted John's routine as an example of how careful management, combined with natural resources, could produce results that were both sustainable and profitable. John read the reports with a mixture of pride and humility. He had discovered something remarkable, but he also knew that it was only valuable if handled responsibly. As the days passed, John began to consider how this discovery could be used to help others without compromising his own ranch. He thought about the other ranchers in the region, the families who depended on their herds for survival, and the potential to improve their livelihoods. He also considered the future of the land, knowing that careless exploitation could destroy what he had worked so hard to protect. John's mind worked constantly, planning, observing, and weighing every decision carefully. He had learned that even a great discovery could bring unforeseen challenges. By the end of the season, John's ranch was thriving like never before. The cattle were strong and healthy, the pastures lush and well managed, and the hidden stream remained the secret heart of his operations. His daily routine, which had once seemed ordinary, now held the power to transform not only his own ranch but the entire region. John McAllister had become more than a simple rancher. He had become an innovator, a man whose careful observation and dedication were beginning to attract attention far beyond the rolling plains he called home. At night, as the wind whispered through the tall grasses and the stars stretched across the sky, John reflected on what had happened. The discovery of the stream had changed everything, but it had also reinforced a lesson he had always known. That success came not from luck or shortcuts, but from patience, persistence, and respect for the land. His 3-times-a-day routine, simple yet disciplined, had revealed a truth that few others had recognized. Small, consistent actions, carried out with care and attention, could lead to extraordinary results. John knew that challenges were still ahead. The attention of government officials, neighboring ranchers, and even distant investors could bring both opportunity and danger. But he felt prepared. The lessons of the land, the herd, and the quiet power of observation had equipped him to face whatever came next. And deep down, he understood that this was only the beginning. The discovery of the stream, the unusual health of the cattle, and the potential to change ranching practices had set in motion a chain of events that would continue to unfold, shaping not only his own life but the future of the Wild West itself. The summer sun blazed high over the plains, and John McAllister's ranch had never looked healthier. The cattle were strong, the pastures green, and the hidden stream continued to provide a source of life for the herd. Yet, with every sign of success came new challenges. The very discovery that had improved his ranch also brought attention from people who saw opportunity in his work, people whose intentions were not always honest. John could sense the tension rising, even before anyone spoke a word. It started quietly. Neighboring ranchers began showing up more frequently, asking questions about his methods. At first, their visits were polite, almost casual, but John noticed the curious glances at the stream, the way they measured the land with their eyes, and the subtle suggestions that perhaps he should share or sell the secret. John listened carefully, answering politely but carefully. He had learned long ago that the frontier was full of people looking for a shortcut to success, and he would not be rushed or tricked into handing over what he had discovered. As weeks passed, the pressure increased. One afternoon, a group of men from a nearby ranch rode over without warning. They were larger landowners, men who controlled vast herds and wielded influence in the surrounding towns. Their leader, a man named Cyrus Beaumont, approached John with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You've done well here, John," he said, "but don't you think it's time to share your secret with the rest of us? We could make a lot of money together." John remained calm, gripping the reins of his horse tightly. "This land is mine," he said evenly. "The stream is part of my ranch and my cattle depend on it. I won't be pressured into giving away what I've discovered." Beaumont's smile faded, replaced by a steely expression. "You're making enemies," he said. "People don't like it when one man succeeds while others fall behind. It might be better for everyone if you reconsider." John knew that these words were more than a warning, they were a threat, but he was not a man to be intimidated. He had faced storms, predators, and the unforgiving land itself. Now he would face human threats with the same steady resolve. He nodded politely and led the men away from the stream, keeping his tone calm. "I appreciate your interest," he said. "But my focus is on the cattle and the land. That is where my responsibility lies." That evening, John could not shake the tension. He walked along the stream, watching the cattle drink in the fading light. The water glimmered as if it knew the struggles that lay ahead. He knew that protecting the stream and the herd was now as important as caring for their health. The discovery that had brought prosperity had also brought danger, and he would have to remain vigilant. His daily routine, morning, noon, and night inspections, now served as a shield as much as it served as a method for improving the herd. Over the following weeks, the challenges multiplied. Beaumont and his men tried to find ways to gain access to the stream, observing John's habits from a distance. Other ranchers began spreading rumors, claiming that John was hiding something, that his success was unnatural. Even some townspeople questioned him, curious about the secret to his thriving herd. John listened to none of it. He focused on what he could control: the health of the cattle, the maintenance of the fences, and the careful protection of the stream. One particularly hot afternoon, John discovered a broken fence along the eastern boundary. It had been tampered with, the wood splintered in a way that suggested human interference. He examined the damage carefully, noting that the trail leading to the break showed signs of boots and wagon wheels. Someone had tried to access the land without permission. John's heart pounded, but he remained calm. He repaired the fence, reinforcing it with extra posts and locks, and set a watch near the stream to ensure that no one could approach unnoticed. His vigilance became even more intense, and he doubled the number of times he checked the herd and the land each day. Despite the threats, John also found unexpected allies. Some neighboring ranchers respected his work and admired his dedication. They offered support quietly, helping reinforce the fences, sharing observations about the herd, and advising on ways to protect the land. These acts of quiet loyalty reminded John that even in a world full of jealousy and greed, there were those who valued honesty, hard work, and integrity. He welcomed their help, knowing that together they could protect the discovery and ensure it remained a force for good. Meanwhile, Harper's earlier government visit began to have consequences. Officials and inspectors showed increased interest in John's work, arriving to take notes, samples, and observations. Some officials were genuinely curious, hoping to learn from John's methods and apply them elsewhere. Others were more calculating, recognizing the potential economic value of the stream. John welcomed those who sought knowledge, explaining his routine and sharing what he could without compromising the ranch. But he remained cautious, knowing that information could be misused if it fell into the wrong hands. As the season progressed, John realized that managing the ranch was now about more than the cattle. It was about leadership, strategy, and protection. Every action required thought and attention. He scheduled the herds grazing carefully, rotated pastures to maintain soil health, and ensured that access to the stream was controlled. He trained his small team of cowhands to watch for unusual activity, to recognize threats, and to act responsibly. The ranch had become a fortress of knowledge and care, a place where the health of the cattle and the safety of the land were the highest priorities. One evening, as John sat near the stream after completing his evening routine, he reflected on the challenges he had faced. He thought about Beaumont and the larger ranchers, the inspectors, and the curious neighbors. He understood that conflict was inevitable when someone discovered something extraordinary. But he also knew that patience, vigilance, and integrity could overcome even the greatest threats. He resolved to continue his routine, to maintain the health of the herd, and to protect the land at all costs. In the following months, John faced a series of smaller confrontations and tests. Someone tried to divert a small branch of the stream to weaken his land. Others spread false rumors to discredit him. Yet John met each challenge with calm, careful action. He repaired the water channels, reinforced the fences, and calmly addressed the rumors by continuing his work without fanfare. His resilience became a quiet statement. No threat, no matter how bold, could undermine his dedication or his discovery. Through all these trials, John's relationship with the land deepened. He learned to read the subtle signs of the herd's health, the patterns of the water, and the rhythms of the prairie. His routine, 3 times a day inspections, was no longer just a habit. It was a method of survival, protection, and innovation. The land rewarded him for his care, providing strong cattle, fertile pastures, and a steady stream of water that could not be matched anywhere nearby. By the end of the year, the ranch had emerged stronger than ever. The cattle were thriving, the land was in excellent condition, and John's careful management had transformed the property into a model of sustainable ranching. Yet the challenges had not ended. The attention from others continued, and John knew that new obstacles would arise. But he also knew that he had the knowledge, discipline, and support to face whatever came next. As the sun set over the plains, casting long shadows across the fields, John stood near the stream and watched the herd settle for the night. He felt a sense of quiet pride, knowing that he had faced adversity and emerged stronger. The hidden waterway, once unknown, had become the heart of the ranch, a source of life, discovery, and resilience. And John understood that protecting it, maintaining his routine, and staying true to his principles were as important as any physical labor he performed on the land. The challenges of the Wild West were many, from weather to disease, from rival ranchers to government scrutiny. Yet John McAllister had proven that careful observation, disciplined routine, and steadfast integrity could overcome even the most difficult obstacles. The discovery of the stream and its effects on the herd had changed his life, but it had also tested him in ways he could not have imagined. He had learned that true success required not only skill, but courage, patience, and the wisdom to protect what mattered most. As night fell and the stars glittered across the vast plains, John knew that his story was still unfolding. The discovery that had transformed his herd had also brought conflict, testing his resolve and his principles. But through vigilance, determination, and the quiet power of consistent effort, he had navigated these challenges successfully. The future was uncertain, but John was prepared, confident that his methods, his land, and his dedication would continue to guide him through whatever lay ahead. The sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a warm, golden light across the ranch. John McAllister stepped outside his cabin as he had done every morning for decades. The familiar routine greeted him, the soft crunch of earth underfoot, the gentle lowing of the cattle, and the whisper of the wind through the tall grasses. Though years had passed since he first discovered the hidden stream, nothing had changed the essence of his life. His routine, 3 times a day inspections of the herd, remained the heart of the ranch. Yet now, the importance of that routine extended far beyond his own land. John looked over the herd, grazing peacefully near the stream. The cattle were strong, healthy, and full of energy, a living testament to the care, observation, and patience he had devoted to them. The hidden water source, once unknown to anyone, had become the foundation of his success. He had faced threats from larger ranchers, skepticism from neighbors, and the pressures of government attention, yet he had remained steadfast. Every challenge had been met with careful thought, consistent effort, and a dedication to the land and the animals under his care. The story of John's discovery had spread beyond the boundaries of his ranch. Word traveled through nearby towns, and letters from curious ranchers arrived seeking guidance. Many had heard of the hidden stream and its remarkable effect on the cattle. Some wanted to replicate the success, others simply wanted to learn from John's methods. He welcomed those who were sincere, sharing advice on careful observation, the importance of routine, and the ethical management of land and water. But he always emphasized one thing. The secret was not merely the stream itself, but the patience, care, and consistency behind it. Government officials continued to take interest. Harper, the inspector who had first visited the ranch, returned with colleagues to study John's methods. They documented the improvements in the herd, measured the mineral content of the water, and took notes on the land management techniques John employed. These reports eventually influenced ranching practices across the region. John's disciplined routine, which had once seemed ordinary, became an example of how careful observation and consistent care could create extraordinary results. Despite the attention, John remained humble. He did not seek fame or recognition. The work he had done was for the cattle, the land, and the future of the ranch. Yet, he could not deny the impact his discovery had made. Ranchers in other areas began experimenting with their own methods, inspired by the success of John's herd. Some even traveled long distances to observe his routine firsthand, hoping to learn from his example. John welcomed these visitors with patience and generosity, guiding them without ever compromising the safety of his land or the well-being of his animals. As the years passed, the ranch became a model of sustainable and innovative practices. The hidden stream, once overlooked and unknown, had transformed the land. Cattle grew healthier and stronger, fields flourished under careful management, and the ranch as a whole thrived. John's methods demonstrated that the Wild West was not only a place of survival, but also a land where observation, patience, and careful stewardship could produce remarkable results. His 3 times a day routine was no longer just a personal habit. It was a technique that inspired a generation of ranchers. John also understood the importance of passing on his knowledge. He mentored young ranch hands, teaching them not only how to care for the cattle, but also how to respect the land and observe the smallest details. He emphasized that success was not achieved through shortcuts or exploitation, but through careful attention and persistence. The young men and women who worked under him carried these lessons into the broader world, spreading the influence of John's practices across the plains. The hidden stream remained at the heart of the ranch, a symbol of discovery, perseverance, and respect for nature. John often reflected on how such a simple source of water had changed everything. It was not the water alone, he realized, but the combination of observation, routine, and thoughtful care that had allowed him to unlock its potential. The discovery had challenged him, tested his character, and forced him to confront both human and natural obstacles. Yet through all these trials, he had remained steadfast, proving that integrity and patience were as vital as any resource. John's reputation grew, not as a man seeking glory, but as a rancher whose methods were revolutionary. His work demonstrated that even in the harsh conditions of the Wild West, thoughtful management could yield extraordinary outcomes. Other ranchers began adapting his techniques, learning to observe their cattle carefully, monitor water and soil, and maintain consistent routines. The ripple effects of John's discovery were felt far beyond the boundaries of his own property, transforming ranching practices and inspiring innovation across the region. As he grew older, John found satisfaction not only in the thriving herd, but in the knowledge that he had made a lasting impact. The ranch continued to prosper, the stream remained abundant, and the principles he had followed, observation, patience, and consistency, were now part of the legacy he would leave behind. He knew that the land and the herd would continue to thrive long after he was gone, guided by the principles he had lived by every day. John's story became part of local history, shared by neighbors, ranchers, and travelers who visited the region. People spoke of the man who had discovered a hidden stream, observed his cattle with care, and transformed his ranch through simple but consistent actions. The tale inspired others to look closely at their land, to value patience and observation, and to understand that small, thoughtful actions could create extraordinary results. In the evenings, John often sat by the stream, watching the water ripple over the rocks and listening to the soft sounds of the herd settling for the night. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the long hours of work, the careful observation, the challenges he had faced, and the discoveries that had changed everything. It was a quiet life, but it was a life of purpose, integrity, and lasting impact. The routine he had followed so faithfully, 3 times a day inspections of the herd, had become more than a habit. It had become a legacy. John McAllister understood that true history was often made not through grand gestures, but through quiet, consistent effort. His story was not one of wealth, fame, or conquest, but of dedication, insight, and respect for the land and animals that depended on him. The hidden stream, the thriving herd, and the prosperous ranch were tangible evidence of the power of careful observation, perseverance, and patience. And the lessons he had learned about responsibility, integrity, and the importance of steady, thoughtful action would live on in the practices of ranchers for generations. As he watched the sunset paint the plains in shades of gold and red, John felt a profound sense of peace. He had faced every challenge with courage, protected the land and the herd with wisdom, and discovered a method that could benefit countless others. The Wild West was a land of trials and opportunities, and John had proven that with care, consistency, and respect, one could turn discovery into lasting impact. The story of his life, and the simple routine that had led to greatness, would be remembered long after the plains had settled into quiet once more. In the end, John's discovery had done more than improve his own ranch. It had changed the way people thought about ranching, observation, and the power of small, consistent actions. The legacy of the hidden stream and the disciplined routine would continue to inspire, showing that even in the harshest conditions, patience, care, and insight could transform lives. John McAllister's story was one of quiet courage, thoughtful innovation, and the enduring impact of dedication and integrity. The plains stretched endlessly before him, calm and serene under the fading light. The herd grazed peacefully, the stream shimmered softly, and John knew that he had fulfilled the promise he had made to the land and the animals under his care. He had faced challenges, overcome threats, and remained true to his principles. And in doing so, he had created a story worth remembering, a story of discovery, perseverance, and a legacy that would endure for generations to come.